President Joe Biden, who has recently adopted hardline immigration policies, is today announcing another immigration policy. This time, however, it'll be one of the biggest efforts in over a decade to legalize undocumented immigrants. The new program would allow the undocumented spouses and stepchildren of US citizens to apply for permanent residence and get a green card without having to leave the US, according to senior administration officials. Approximately 500 OOO spouses and 50,000 of their stepchildren could be eligible for the new program, the officials said in a call with reporters Monday. Though these individuals were always technically able to apply for permanent residence through their US citizen spouse or stepparent, they typically would not do so. That's because anyone who enters the US without permission and stays for more than a year has to leave the country and remain abroad for 10 years before they are eligible to apply for permanent residence. Immigrants can apply for waivers of this 10-year bar, but the process faces major backlogs. The new Biden administration policy essentially allows non-citizen spouses and stepchildren to bypass the 10-year bar by offering them parole, which protects them from deportation and gives them work authorization. It's the biggest effort to legalize undocumented immigrants since former President Barack Obama unveiled the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program in 2012, shielding from deportation undocumented immigrants who had arrived in the country as children. It's all the more surprising because lately, Biden has been emulating former President Donald Trump more than Obama on immigration, though he came into office promising to undo the legacy of his predecessor. Biden maintained Trump's pandemic-era restrictions on the border for more than 2 years and has introduced new versions of several Trump immigration policies, including a new rule to limit access to asylum when border crossings are high. It seems the president is trying to appease both sides of a key 2024 election issue that has plagued his campaign. He's under fire from those to his left who want to achieve justice for immigrant families living in the US and seeking the protection of its asylum laws. There is also an increasing share of Americans who want to see immigration levels decrease. Whether that ends up working for Biden in November remains to be seen, but the introduction of the new permanent residency policy is undeniably good news for undocumented immigrants caught up in the US's broken legal system. Who's eligible? To be eligible for the new program, spouses must be present in the US without having been legally admitted to the US or provided immigration parole, a kind of temporary deportation relief. They must have also lived in the US for at least a decade and have a legally valid marriage to a US citizen as of June 17, 2024. And they must merit a favorable exercise of discretion and not pose a threat to public safety, according to a senior administration official. For stepchildren to be eligible, they must be unmarried and under 21. Their parent must have married a US citizen before the stepchild turned 18. Those who receive approval from the Department of Homeland Security under the new program will be allowed to apply for permanent residency for a 3-year period thereafter, in which they will also be eligible for work authorization and be allowed to stay with their families in the US. More information on eligibility will be available once a notice is published in the Federal Register, which is expected in the coming weeks. Administration officials said they anticipate applications will open up by the end of the summer. Most of the individuals who will benefit from the new program will likely be Mexican, given the profile of immigrants who arrived in the US 10 years ago. On average, those impacted have resided in the US for 23 years, according to Biden administration officials. Is it legal? Republicans are already criticizing the president's policy as a mass amnesty scheme. For years, they have blocked legislation in Congress to legalize the undocumented population in the US, as well as challenged programs like DACA in court. As a result, the federal government had to stop accepting new DACA applications under Trump. But this new path to legal status might not face the same fate in court. That's because it's based on parole in place, a long-standing legal authority that the Homeland Security Secretary can exercise on a temporary, discretionary basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. The Biden administration will likely elaborate on these potential reasons or benefits in its Federal Register notice, which could help protect the policy against legal challenges. Parole in place has historically been used on a smaller scale in the context of undocumented children, parents, and spouses of active duty or retired service members, but at the recommendation of immigrant advocates. The Biden administration is now looking to rely on its parole authority more heavily. What does it mean for the election? The Biden campaign might hope the US citizen spouses of those who stand to benefit from the policy will be more likely to vote for the president this November in purple states, including Arizona and Nevada, which both have large Latino populations. But the views of Latino voters on immigration are complicated, and when considering Biden's immigration policies as a whole, they might not see a compelling case to vote for him. An April Axios Ipsos and Noticias Telemundo poll found that 64% of Latinos supported Biden's new rule restricting asylum when border crossings are high and 40% support a fence or wall along the southern border. But 59% also support the right of people fleeing crime and violence in Latin America to seek asylum in the US. That suggests that they want to see more border controls, but not necessarily harsh crackdowns. That's a balance that Biden, facing critics on both his left and right, appears to be attempting to strike with his new series of rules. President Joe Biden issued a new proclamation on Tuesday that bars asylum seekers who cross the border without permission from applying for protections in the US when migrant crossings exceed a daily average of 500 in a week. It is arguably the most restrictive measure Biden has taken yet on the US-Mexico border. It comes as Republicans continue to use his struggle to stem migration against him in the presidential election and as Americans have grown averse to immigration. If allowed to take effect, the proclamation would reshape the asylum system, no longer guaranteeing migrants who have credible fear of harm or persecution in their home countries the right to seek safe haven in the US no matter how they cross the border. "We must face the simple truth," Biden said in remarks at the White House on Tuesday. "To protect America as a land that welcomes immigrants, you must first secure the border and secure it now." Former President Donald Trump tried similar measures to undermine asylum, invoking the same legal authorities that Biden is now citing. Those authorities give the president broad powers over immigration. But they are not limitless, and some of Trump's policies, including an early iteration of his travel ban against citizens of Muslim-majority countries, were struck down in the courts on that basis. Courts haven't fully articulated the limits on the president's powers to restrict immigration. This new executive action from Biden will likely pose a major test in that respect. Whether the executive action survives legal challenges, however, is beside the point for Biden. It doesn't take a scalpel to us asylum law, but a sledgehammer, and that suggests the political optics of the policy are more important to Biden than if it actually does anything. How the policy will work: a proclamation will take effect June 5. When border crossings exceed the threshold outlined by Biden, asylum seekers who cross the border without permission will continue to be barred from applying for asylum until after migrant encounters drop below a 7-day average of 500. That doesn't necessarily preclude them from staying in the US if they haven't been detected by immigration enforcement. It just deprives them of the opportunity to apply for legal status that they might otherwise qualify for, said Kenji Kazuka, the International Rescue Committee's Asylum Policy Director. Not all will be barred from applying for asylum when the proclamation is triggered. Unaccompanied children and victims of trafficking are exempt, as well as individuals who present exceptionally compelling circumstances, which may include experiencing a medical emergency or an imminent threat to their life or safety. Migrants who sign up for an appointment at a port of entry to enter the US will still be permitted to cross, though it's unclear how many appointments might be made available at times of peak demand. Between January and February 2024, nearly 450,000 people were allowed to cross the border by scheduling appointments on a government-sponsored phone app called CBP One. The question is whether this will survive legal scrutiny. "We intend to sue. A ban on asylum is illegal just as it was when Trump unsuccessfully tried it," said Legal Alert, head of the Occlu's Immigrant Rights Project. Biden cites federal law that gives the president the authority to suspend or restrict the entry of any immigrants that they deem detrimental to the interests of the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court, in the case Trump v. Hawaii over the Trump-era travel ban, has previously said that this language exudes deference to the president. Biden also cites the federal prohibition on any immigrant entering the U.S. except under such reasonable rules, regulations, and orders, and subject to such limitations and exceptions as the president may prescribe. However, that doesn't mean that the president can go against existing federal law. U.S. asylum law allows any immigrant to apply for asylum if they are physically present in the U.S., regardless of how they got there. This will likely be a point of contention in the Occlu's lawsuit over the proclamation and has also been at issue in lawsuits over other Biden and Trump policies restricting asylum eligibility that have yet to be resolved. Immigrant advocates will say the asylum provision explicitly allows people to apply for asylum even if they enter between ports of entry, and therefore to suspend entry because too many people are entering between ports of entry violates an express provision of the immigration law, said Stephen Yaylor, a professor at Cornell Law School. Courts will have to decide how much deference to give President Biden and whether his lawyers have crafted the executive order carefully enough. If the proclamation does survive legal challenges, the potential humanitarian consequences are concerning. Migrants apprehended by immigration enforcement and found ineligible for asylum under the proclamation may be sent back to Mexico or their home countries with potentially disastrous consequences. People seeking refuge in the United States will be at greater risk of being returned to the danger they fled without a chance to explain their fear or make their case before an immigration judge, Kazuka said. Biden wants a political win on immigration. This is what it has come to for Biden. Biden came into office promising to undo the cruelties of his predecessor. His party's 2020 platform didn't even mention border security and instead focused on expanding legal immigration pathways, rolling back the U.S.'s immigration detention regime, ending the root causes of migration, and other immigrant-friendly provisions. For years after former President Barack Obama was dubbed the deporter-in-chief, it seemed as though Trump had pushed Democrats to embrace a newfound moral case for increasing immigration. But amid political pressure, Biden has advanced immigration policies that his Republican predecessor devised himself or would have at least been proud of. In addition to Tuesday's proclamation, Biden kept Trump's Title 42 policy in place for more than 2 years, allowing him to turn away swaths of immigrants at the border under the guise of protecting public health during the COVID-19 pandemic. He also instituted his version of Trump's asylum transit ban. That rule allows immigration enforcement officials to turn away migrants for a number of reasons: if they do not have valid travel and identification documents, if they've traveled through another country without applying for asylum, if they don't show up at a port of entry at an appointed time, and more. And in February, Biden endorsed a bipartisan bill that included border security measures that Democrats, who staked out a fairly unified position in support of immigrant rights during the Trump era, wouldn't have dreamed of supporting a few years ago. Republicans would have happily voted for it if Trump hadn't intervened. He explicitly wanted to keep the border a live issue in the presidential election. That allowed Biden to frame the proclamation as a last resort. Frankly, I would prefer to address this issue through bipartisan legislation because that's the only way to actually get the kind of system we have now that's broken fixed, he said Tuesday. But Republicans have left me no choice. All of this has put Biden at odds with his party's progressive wing at a time when fractures in the Democratic coalition are already deepening over the war in Gaza. It's also a reflection of where Americans are on the issue of immigration. Voters have consistently ranked immigration among the most important issues facing the country, and the share of Americans who want to see immigration levels decrease is at a decade high. Republicans like Texas Gov. Greg Abbott, who has been busing migrants to blue cities, have succeeded in weaponizing the issue against Democrats. Biden's performance on the border has consistently dragged down his approval ratings. Centrist Democrats, including Biden, have consequently become hawkish on the border, at the advice of Sen. Chris Murphy DCT in a widely circulated February memo, and at the expense of Americans better understanding what's happening at the border and why. This is a political statement so that Biden can say I'm tough on the border and try to deflect all the criticism that Republicans are throwing at him, Yaylor said. Biden can at least say, I tried.